Hey everybody, it's Tripl-L coming in to read or go through the analysis of chapter 270 of My Hero Academia. It is a big chapter. I've got an analysis and I've got the page-by-page walkthrough. The analysis is going to be focused on what was going on with Shigaraki because I saw some comments on Viz that looked like people were confused, and I thought it would be worth actually going through and showing my thought process for why I believe the things I believe for this particular chapter, and I will walk you guys all through it. It's going to be a fun one. It's going to be a big one. Anyway, getting into the chapter, this chapter was pretty great. Shigaraki came back, and the author ended up making use of two way outs that we had talked about last time. That being the electric shock that Mirko talked about, and the weird all for one and one for all connection, which we did see capitalized within the chapter. So overall, good on the author for making use of things that he had set up before. There was not an ass pull here. He telegraphed what was going to happen well enough while also obscuring it with other ways for Shigaraki to come back in. Now, like I said, there's a ton we got to get through, and we're going to start with what actually happened in Shigaraki's inner world. So anyway, I got my notes. I'm going to be reading from my notes because there's a lot to get through. I want to make sure I don't miss anything. So what I want you to keep in mind is what we're seeing here with Shigaraki's little inner monologue or inner adventure is twisted peace. And the main thing I believe is that the family members are not ghosts. They are just figments of Shigaraki's subconscious. In other words, their words and their presence is not reliable in terms of making bigger statements about the cosmology of Hero Academia. I think they exist just to give Shigaraki an opportunity to say things and do things that he once couldn't do. So we're going to just jump into page 6 and 7 because that's where this whole thing begins. Points to note here is that we can see Shigaraki's house, the one that he destroyed, and then we see society with hands below, and we see Horikoshi's hands fetish on full display. The most interesting thing here is society and the hand sticking out of it. If I was to try and figure out meaning, this reminds me of chapter 237's image of society. This was the image used to illustrate Shigaraki's formative event with regards to society not reaching out to help him. Here's like that old shot. You can see what he was saying about that. The hands might be there because metaphorically, all that's ever left of something that Shigaraki destroys are the hands, or at least that's what All for One established. We could also say that society keeps him in check like the hands once did. So it just paints like a relationship with society. Regardless, it's a toxic relationship. Anyway, jumping off that last point, this might be why all the hands are around him, because those hands are there to try to restrain him. And we did get that imagery confirmed to us at the end of this whole little inner adventure. It's important to note, though, that Shigaraki no longer needs hands to restrain him as per the events of the villain arc. Now we're getting to the meat here, page 8-9. So Hannah in this page says, "Daddy says all that stuff, but don't worry, I'm on your side, Tenko." And then she says, "Sorry about that. I shouldn't have done that. I was the one who said it had to be a secret. Sorry." So you should be able to tell, this is straight up a flashback that's being repurposed to make it give the illusion that people accept Shigaraki. They don't. The on your side stuff and the pose comes word for word and pose for pose from chapter 235, and the apology comes word for word from chapter 236 with again the same pose. Like I said, the flashback is structured in a way to make it seem like Hannah is with Shigaraki. She's not. She's with Tenko, and we'll see that in the next page. Pages 10 to 11 are the pages that pretty much confirm that these are just flashbacks we contextualize that Shigaraki can now interact with. We see Shigaraki's mom reiterating the "do you still want to be a hero" line, and we have Shigaraki dealing with the resurgence of his father using the same words that Shigaraki recalls. In page 12 to 13, I just wanted to give a giant props to the author for showing the change from black hair to white hair, signaling the evolution or the timeline of Shigaraki's development. Anyway, on page 12 and 13 is where things get really wonky and new elements come into this whole flashback. We now see All for One, who might legit be a foreign element. The reason we can suppose this is because Shigaraki says that All for One looks like Kurogiri. This is the one for all style disturbance that we've seen before when Izuku was in his inner world. Because this disturbance exists in the one for all power structure, we have to assume it's valid to say that this is a legitimate All for One vestige and not a mental figment, especially considering that Shigaraki has the original quirk. This does do some interesting things for the one for all logic though, so we'll chat about that later. Anyway, page 15, super important page. We see the family members holding Shigaraki back. These are not spirits of Shigaraki's family members, I think. This is quite sincerely his subconscious that we'll call Tenko trying to stop him. Here's how we can say that. 1. These arm placements are the exact same ones outlined in chapter 237. Props to the author for keeping that little bit of detail. These hands are the ones that existed in the era of the Shigaraki that didn't have his memories as Tenko. What's important here is that this hand context only exists in the amnesiac Shigaraki era. This is a context unique to the Shigaraki that needs to be restrained. This is a context that was born only within Shigaraki's mind. That's why we can say that Shigaraki's mind is trying to stop him. When we talk about restrain, that idea, this is Shigaraki's image of restraint. And just for the record, let me take you back to chapter 222 and 237. In chapter 222, Shigaraki told us when he has the whole family on him, he feels like he wants to vomit, but he also feels at peace. This is reiterated in chapter 237's flashback when Shigaraki as a child acknowledges that he's sick, like he's going to hurl, but that he's also strangely calm. The other rhetoric that we have for the hands is All For One in chapter 237 saying that his family's hands will restrain him, keep him in check. So we look at the voice saying stop. If this is Shigaraki's subconscious, we can paint a sad picture. The hands restrain Shigaraki and also afford him peace. This is what they've been established to do. And these might be the only things that can do that. So the Tenko subconscious, knowing only those as its tools to calm Shigaraki down, has to use them even though they have negative connotations, such as those being the connections to All For One and the sick, nauseous type of feeling. Ultimately, I want you to take away, this is a really strange situation. The mechanism that All For One created for Shigaraki is ultimately what Shigaraki's mind is trying to use to stop him from approaching All For One. Shigaraki's family legitimately would never hold him in this way. We know this because when Shigaraki was in danger, the image we got was of his mother rushing to hug him in spite of the danger. The placement of Shigaraki's father's hand seals the deal because the guy would not have gone for his face if this was legit a ghost. Like honestly, if these people were legit ghosts, they would have all have been hugging Shigaraki and telling him that they love him. Overall, what this tells you that this is a placement that Shigaraki himself picked. Really, it gets kind of wonky considering if we try to bring Tenko into this. But what we should take away from this here is that Shigaraki's mind is using the tools that restrained him to try and restrain him now. Moving into page 16 and 17, next up is the Nana placement, and this screws things up quite a bit. I don't think that this is legitimately Nana, with One For All and All For One screwing things up with the way that they can communicate across each other. This could be a vestige, but it's likelier that it's another Tamura defense mechanism, and this is indicated by this shot. This shot tells you that Shigaraki remembers the picture of Nana that he saw when he was a child. The way that I read this scene is Nana appears because Shigaraki has this memory. Remember, Nana gave Shigaraki hope in chapter 235. Internally, Nana is the manifestation of Shigaraki's belief that he could be a hero, which is why the don't forget thing is here. Allow me to remind you of the type of hope that Nana gave this kid. So my other grandma was a hero. My family had a hero in it. You know what, Mon? I feel like I could take on the world right now. That's a kid who was pretty much just desperately holding on to any little bit of light he could to tell him that he could be a hero in the future. Now, if you're thinking that All For One kept Nana's hands, okay, let's go through this. This is Shigaraki in chapter 237. Look at the missing hand on his head. Then in a later shot, you have the hand on his head. What happened? Shigaraki killed some thugs, and then All For One gave them their hands, and those hands appear on Shigaraki's torso and his shoulders. And then in that bunch of the hands, there was one extra hand that All For One said he was giving Shigaraki as a bonus to replace one of the hands he destroyed. This is the problematic hand. For this to be Nana's hand, All For One needs to have Nana's body preserved somewhere. And legit, he could have that body somewhere. But you can tell it's going to require some solid justification as to why he would keep that body. Right now, I think it's unlikely. That said, if the author decided later on making this Nana's hand, he can make it happen. But the justification will need to be really good at the time. That said, no matter how you look at it, given the rate that Shigaraki destroys hands at, no matter how you look at it, Nana's hand probably doesn't exist now if this was originally Nana's hand. So back to this scene, especially considering the thug's presence in the birth of Shigaraki, them being his first wanted kill, it tells me that this particular mechanism is coming from whatever is left of Tenko trying to stop Shigaraki, because it's using things relevant to Tenko, that being the family being the ones to keep him in check. The thugs are the proof of Shigaraki's desire to kill, and they aren't here, which makes sense. Anyway, also on this page, we have Shigaraki destroying the restraint, and that isn't a big deal because Shigaraki already did this back during the villain fight. He's already released himself from those restraints. What's actually more important is the fact that the restraints keep coming back, like they keep growing back and coming towards him, because that implies that some part of Shigaraki is still trying to hold him back, which is good because it means that whatever goodness is inside of Shigaraki hasn't fully disappeared yet, although it's definitely compromised. One last thing I want to say about the scene is that Nana has a different coloration than everyone else holding Shigaraki at that moment. I think that's just to emphasize that she came into the scene. That might also be the visual metaphor that says that Nana is a vestige as opposed to being a memory. But honestly, it's hard to say. It's really hard to say, especially when you look back at the previous page where everyone else had proper color. It may just be a visual technique to make her stand out more. Anyway, the biggest question mark is the significance of Nana in this scene. Is it a vestige or is it a figment of Shigaraki's defense mechanism? Is it both? Is the figment in there, and because of that the vestige can exist within it because there's like a mental link there? I don't know. Regardless, Nana is saying don't ever forget that you wanted to be a hero. I think there's no way to go about that, especially when you have that little flashback scene there. That's so specific to Shigaraki's memory that I'm leaning on it being a subconscious defense. Okay, so that's the main chunk of the analysis. Let's do the page-by-page walkthrough because there's more question marks in the chapter. We're going to page 1, and page 1 was a simple page establishing what we were getting in the chapter. President Mike gives reasons for why he's carrying Garaki, and Exless starts noticing stuff. We go into page 2 and 3. Exless notices an operational machine that he thinks he should destroy. I'm really not sure what else could be significant here other than there's still electricity in the area and Exless deciding to destroy it. Because honestly, looking at it, I don't think that was a bad thought. I don't think it was a bad thought to think I should destroy that machine. The real bad thing I think that comes out from this is that it led to him wasting more time because of a later page that I'll point out. But if you guys have any interpretation, please let me know. It doesn't look like Exless actually fired at it because I don't see the sound effects for it. There is the little glow on his eye, but it's really hard to tell. Regardless, I think the big thing here is that this guy just lost time, because honestly this chapter probably happens in the span of seconds. So page 3 has President Mike being told about the singularity theory, and what's actually really important here is that President Mike is the second most relevant character to have for this particular scene. Like legit, this was pretty good. I'd even say this was pretty masterful. The reason is President Mike was the one who set up the explanation of the Quark Singularity Doomsday Theory all the way back in chapter 166, the first time that we heard it explained. He wasn't the one that explained it, but he was the one that questioned what was going on with those kids back then, which led Seiji to telling him about the theory. Now, what's actually interesting is that when President Mike is talking about the scholar, like giving us the details that the scholar went missing and that the people said that he died a few years later, that actually implies, given that President Mike was not too aware of what was going on back in chapter 166, that President Mike actually went and researched. That's what it implies, given his lack of knowledge in that earlier chapter. So good on the author. If that's actually what he did, good on the author. Anyway, it was interesting to hear about how people didn't want to think about another apocalypse, and it was cool to know that Garaki is over 120 years old. So that means, you know, Garaki, if we assume 120 is the max, he would have been around 50 those days. So pretty cool stuff. Honestly, like some pretty cool stuff. We go over into page 4 and 5, and we have a lot going on. The biggest thing is just the stuff that Garaki is telling us. One, we got like more admiration of All for One. We get the quirk explanation, that being life force. Like honestly, I'm still a little bit sketched out on this quirk. I still don't think that with this explanation that we got, this quirk makes logical sense when it interacts with Aizawa's erasure. And I'm just gonna give you my power logic. I'm reading it off here, so I'll go through it quickly because I don't think this thing works the way it's described. Reason being, the quirk doubles lifespan. Okay, that means that if the quirk is turned off, what is changing is your rate of aging. So if you're over 120, what should happen is that you now start aging at the rate of, let's say, a normal 130-year-old. There is no way that you would suddenly waste away in the matter of seconds. If we are just saying that this thing affects lifespans, What's worse, if this is just a lifespan doubler, if you have the quirk turned off, when it comes back on, it shouldn't be able to legitimately rejuvenate you because it's not a rejuvenation quirk, but that's exactly what we saw back with the double. If this is legitimately just a lifespan doubler, you should now have the new aged form that is now approaching death at half the rate it was when you had the quirk off. And then once it comes back on, the aging rate is just adjusted going forward. Ultimately, aging is linear. Doubling is a linear operation. You don't logically get to go back all of a sudden. That doesn't make sense in the view of a lifespan doubler. So point is, there's either more to the quirk or it's as logically broken as Meteo's quirk is. But I would love to hear what you guys think on that one. Let me know, because I might be wrong. I might be misinterpreting it. Again, like I said, either there's stuff missing or it's a broken quirk. We've had broken quirks before, and when I say broken, I don't mean power broken. I mean like logically broken. So that's where I'm leaving that one. Anyway, continuing with these pages, we have the doctor saying that his is a duplicate, which sets up something for later. Another gross note is that he wanted erasure, which is really concerning, like really kind of creepy, because, you know, it kind of puts a target on Aizawa's back. And finally, President Mike is realizing that the doctor is too big of a fanatical creep. Honestly, I think he's looking at someone with a creepy devotion. Here's why we can say that. He used 4 words to indicate a pitiful blind zealot, that being wretched, Buddha, God, and offering. In context, he called himself wretched. He said All For One had a Buddha-like smile and was God incarnate, and described his quirk as an offering. That's the rhetoric of a religious fanatic. Also, good work on the really creepy face there. It seems like he's having a great time. Anyway, we go into page 12 and 13 because we already talked about the Shigaraki stuff. What I think is significant here is that we see the 75% terminal again. We have the broken computer, and it's important to note that this computer is not the one that's on the machine that Exless spotted. We've been seeing this terminal all throughout the chapters because they've been wanting to tell us that we are going to be 75% Shigaraki. That said, the fact that this thing is still on might also indicate that, again, there's electricity running through all the wires here. This terminal may have been the one that shorted and was the one that surged into the puddle. Who knows? Anyway, page 14 and 15, Garaki says that Shigaraki has the original All For One quirk after All For One entrusted everything to him, and then we get the thing about the duplicated All For One quirk. This is legitimately concerning. There's a lot of horrible implications going on in this scene. First, though, we need to understand, you know, like, what is the difference between an original and a duplicate? Because we need to understand just the order of events here, and maybe the stuff that we talk about here will be invalidated in the future. But here's what I think. Conventional logic would say a duplicate is the one that is manufactured through Garaki's process. Furthermore, we can assume that a person can keep their quirk while a duplicate is produced. The current example maybe being Twice's double quirk. So beyond that, you know, you gotta ask, when did All For One give the original quirk to Shigaraki? There's just too many variables. So what I'm thinking is they made the duplicate of the quirk, and after that just passed on the quirk, and then All For One took on the duplicate after he had his original gone. The big question is, did All For One give it to Shigaraki? And then did Shigaraki just unlock it, or did Garaki only recently implant it? Either of those two lines of thought, it's going to give you vastly different implications. There's just too many variables right now. That said, there are more scary things here. First, vestiges. The chapter implies that unless All For One also gave Shigaraki a stockpile quirk as part of the quirk package, the chapter implies that the vestige feature comes from the All For One, One For All family of quirks. It could also be that All For One and One For All can only carry one vestige, that being the originator's vestige, and that only with a stockpile quirk affecting the original quirk can they store more vestiges. Anyway, at the end of the day, there has to be a reason for why One For All is coveted by All For One. It might still just be because the One For All quirk has the potential of beating the quirk singularity, maybe. Or maybe it's that the One For All quirk can have multiple vestiges. It's hard to tell. Now, what's terrifying is that the duplicated All For One quirk can still detect the presence of All For One's brother's voice. And that implies that right now, 2 All For One quirks are entangled with the One For All quirk. And yeah, there's still a little bit more to chat about on that point. But first, page 16 and 17, I just want to point out the wire that went off was this one right here, very far away from the other machine. I really do think that what happened here is that This, like I said, all happened within seconds, and the few seconds that Exless wasted are what sealed his fate. On the point of his fate, people are also saying that Exless is gonna die, and it's like, yeah, okay, you know what, probably. Although that does says a lot about what Horikoshi is willing to sacrifice, given that he's putting a no-name on the chopping block. That kind of tells me right now that Horikoshi is trying to conserve people, either so he can wipe them all out later for like bigger effect, or he just wants to be kind of conservative with how many people he pulls off that matter. Going into page 18 and 19, these were the last pages. Finally, the big question as we see Izuku and the gang is, who is saying he's coming? I want to bet on the younger brother, but given the shenanigans with the vestiges right now, it may legitimately be Nana. There's reason to say Nana, but it all depends on how the vestiges work. Like, we just don't know. We don't have this properly defined. That said, if it is the brother, it makes it more likely that the Nana in Shigaraki's mind was just a figment, which I'm still kind of rooting for. Anyway, we have reason to believe that it is All For One's brother, because All For One can detect the brother's voice, therefore it's reasonable to assume that the brother can detect him. As for why he's detecting him right now, it may be because the original All For One quirk just woke up within Shigaraki. You might ask, how does that work? Well, it works by the logic that All For One heard his brother's voice when Izuku had that big episode with the One For All unleashing all those abilities. So the notion that the quirk can lie undetected and like quiet so that All For One can't hear it, it isn't unfounded. So it's not unfounded that All For One's version of the quirk can also do this. But again, the big mystery here is the exact mechanics of the vestiges. And now, finally, I can like throw myself back a little bit, because right now I want to talk about my endgame boss theory, and you know, also people freaking out about Shigaraki. First, were people freaking out about Shigaraki saying he's going to be unstoppable, powerful? The author has already given us a way out, and he keeps reiterating the way out multiple times throughout many chapters. Shigaraki is at 75%. Shigaraki is not completed. Incomplete Shigaraki. We still have a way out. This is what tells you that not everyone's going to get wiped out, because Shigaraki's probably going to run out of steam like halfway through. He's going to be super hardcore, but honestly, everyone's efforts might have saved the world, because Shigaraki won't be the 100% perfect creature. Who knows? Maybe after this arc he becomes 100%, because maybe Garaki gets away and they fix him up one last time. But for now, 75% Shigaraki is what guarantees that some people are at least going to survive this. It's not going to be a total wipeout, because Shigaraki still... in regards to the Shigaraki boss theory, like I said yesterday, I'm thinking at the end of the day it's going to be All For One versus One For All, although this chapter throws in some new things into the mix. Right now, I'm thinking if we are going to get All For One being the final boss, I still do think if that's going to happen, it's going to be him taking over Shigaraki's body. Because right now, there is probably an All For One within him. So just taking over the body, and then he gets a new young body that can maybe hold up against Quirk Singularity better. But we don't need to necessarily go down that way, because now Shigaraki has every reason to be the final boss if he has the All For One quirk. And it does make it a cooler parallel if you have Izuku, who has One For All, you know, spiritually with him, and Shigaraki, who has All For One spiritually with them clashing. You know, they have their stands in the background. That would be pretty cool. That would be a really interesting way of doing it. That said, because Shigaraki right now is showing that his mind still has something that's preventing him from going towards All For One, you know, that might be the way for redemption for Shigaraki. That might be the author's way of saying that Izuku can maybe talk to that aspect of Shigaraki, and then maybe after a big fight, that Shigaraki, that part that's frustrating Shigaraki comes back out, like Izuku's somehow able to redeem him if the author chooses to do that. And then once Shigaraki gets redeemed, All For One kicks in and is like, no, none of that, you're mine. And then he takes over the body properly and becomes like, let's save Shigaraki. Right now, the fact is there is a part of Shigaraki's body that rejects All For One. That is a fact. It's now a matter of how that's going to be played up in the future. Shigaraki destroys it, those hands keep coming back. That's one of the best things that we got out of this chapter, because that's one of the things that could be going into some kind of Shigaraki redemption. I do think right now it's not going to be a flat situation of All For One taking over Shigaraki's body. It's going to be a situation where All For One takes over Shigaraki's body only after Shigaraki has been restrained by his own mind. That's what I think we got with those. That's how I've been modifying my theory so far. I am still pulling for an All For One being the final boss. Especially when you consider something like Naruto. Like Naruto went out of control with its final boss. So like honestly, out of control final bosses is just par for the course for Shonen Jump. Anyway, that is it for me, guys. Long video, but I hope you enjoyed it. There was a lot of details, a lot of early chapters we were talking about. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know what you thought down below. Let me know your interpretations. I will be reading some of them. So yeah, everyone, till next time. Hope you have an absolutely great day.